What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be looking back at the 23-24 season in the Championship once again and grading every single Championship club's campaign from F being the absolute worst to A being the absolute best. So without any further ado, let's get stuck into it. Starting off, unfortunately, on a bit of a downer, it's Birmingham City, and they're going into the F column. I think they probably have had the worst season in the Championship when you compare expectation, quality of squad, and also where they actually were at one point, which of course was in October under John Eustace when they were in 6th. Covered this on the channel numerous times. We all know that this is probably one of the worst cases of self-sabotage we've ever seen in the Championship and one of the worst collapses we've ever seen as well. So for me, it's undoubtedly an F because Birmingham were in a position where they'd not been for a long time. They'd not even been above 17th. They were in the playoffs. Were they going to finish in the playoffs? Probably not, but they'd have still probably been mid-table, which would have been a great platform to build from. And instead, not only have they slipped down the league, they've got relegated. It's an utter disaster, and I cannot quite comprehend the glass half full positive attitude from Birmingham fans. I mean, it's great that they're all positive for next season and they're back in the new and everything, but I'd be furious at what's happened. I mean, there's no guarantee they're going to bounce back at all. They've been relegated, and it's a position they should never have been in a million years. So I don't quite get their fans' approach. If there's a Birmingham fan in the comments, let me know what you think. But they have had, I think, when it comes to expectation and where they were to where they are now, the worst season in the Championship. Okay, maybe barring Rotherham, but we'll get to them later. Blackburn didn't do much better. They're going to go in E. Now, I did predict Blackburn to have a poor season, in fairness. I did predict them to be in and around where they were. But I think it's safe to say, if it wasn't for Sammy Szmodics and the goals he scored and the ridiculous season he's had, they probably would have been down instead of Birmingham. You know, and that would have been an F season. So there was probably a suspected drop-off from Blackburn, but let's not forget they were almost in the playoffs last season. So to be flirting with relegation come the final day, I think is pretty disastrous for them. And if it wasn't for Sammy Szmodics having the season of his life, there's an extremely strong chance that they'd have got relegated, which, like Birmingham, would have been an absolute disaster. But because they haven't, and because of Sammy Szmodics, that's what bumps them up to an E. Bristol City, they did Bristol City. They finished mid-table. Now, I will say, Liam Manning is a great addition, I think. I don't ever think they were going to go anywhere above mid-table under Nigel Pearson. So I think the change of manager was a good idea. I like Liam Manning as a coach, and I feel like maybe this is more of a long-term thing, and we'll see Bristol City build over the seasons, and they might start edging towards the playoffs this year or next year. But as for last season, felt like they were moving from one manager to another. Bit of a consolidation. Yep, they finished just above mid-table. I think they might have been 11th. So, yeah, a bit better than the average mid-table season from Bristol City, but nothing special. Hence why they're just sat in a C, which is where they normally are. Cardiff are up next. I've actually put Cardiff in B. Now, I think this is probably down to my pre-season expectations of Cardiff, which weren't good. I thought they'd be right where they were last season or the season before, really fighting in a relegation scrap. But I think Errol Bullett has done a pretty good job, given how the Cardiff squad was looking going into this season, how everyone was a little bit concerned about where they might end up, to keep them away from safety and keep them at times having that little outside glimpse of potentially getting into the playoff fight. I think it's a fantastic job for him, and like Bristol City, if he stays, this could be another club who might build towards something over the coming seasons. But I think just because their pre-season expectations were so low for me, having as solid of a season they've had really surprised me, and that's why they're in B. Coventry, though, I'm going to put in C. Now, I'm going to repeat myself because I think Coventry and Boro have had very similar seasons, but it's not quite a disastrous season for Coventry. The start was, of course, they didn't have a great start at all. And a bit like Boro, if Coventry had started well, they'd have probably been in the playoffs, which would have been a B. Would have been maybe even more had they got promoted via the playoffs. So I'm not going to hate on Coventry's season too much because the bad start hindered them, yes, but they did have a very large turnover of players. They'd lost Gyökeres, they'd lost Hamer. They brought in a lot of players on big money like Ellis Sims, Haji Wright, who were going to take time to adapt. But once they got going, they were pretty good. And I think there's certain players like Ben Sheaf who were outstanding this season. There was points where Coventry looked like they were going to barnstorm in their way into the playoffs without a problem and potentially be the team going in form. Unfortunately, they finished the season on pretty bad form, and I think the FA Cup semi-final, which they were robbed, let's be honest, was, I think, a knockout blow for their season. They never quite recovered from that, but I don't think they've equally had an outstanding season or an awfully bad season. I think this is where Coventry would have expected to be, in and around the playoff mix. Yes, they finished just a little bit short, but I think with the turnover of squad, all the new players on board, I still think this is a respectable finish for them. Huddersfield, they're getting an F2. Now, maybe it's obvious to give any team that's gotten relegated an F, but in all honesty, this has been, I think, writing on the wall for Huddersfield for a while. I think it's safe to say they've been probably inevitably heading this way for a few seasons right now, which is a shame, but their recruitment's not been good enough, their squad was nowhere near good enough, and in the end, they just weren't good enough going forward, didn't score enough goals, and it was always going to be a tough uphill task for them. But given where they were a few seasons ago, Premier League side, to see the slide is pretty bad to see. It's been a disastrous few years for Huddersfield, and who knows whether they'll bounce back in League One. But I think regardless, a club like Huddersfield, with the recent history they've had, I think it's a disaster for them to get relegated, even though it was maybe a little bit more expected. Still a disaster, not great for them, that's why they're in the F category. Hull City, I'm going to give a D. Now, I think pre-season, where Hull finished, being 7th, would have been pretty good. I think Rosenior had still took them one step further, he'd still progressed them in the right direction, which makes the fact that he was sacked even more baffling to me. But that's why I've put them in D, because if there is one criticism you could throw at Rosenior and at Hull, it's that they went for it in January. They signed some outstanding players, some with an option to buy, some were just ridiculous loans for the Championship. They should have got playoffs with that squad, and I think towards the end of the season, they didn't pick up wins in games they really should have been winning, and they let themselves down, I think, when it mattered most. And out of all the teams chasing playoffs, I think Hull were the best equipped, and they'd thrown everything at it to get the job done. And the fact they fell short, I think, did register as a failure for the squad they had. That's why they're below Coventry, because they should have been in the playoffs with the team they had, with the players they brought in. They hadn't. They fell short when they really should have been in there, because they had the opportunity right there in front of them, and they failed to capitalise. That might be why Rosenior was sacked. I still don't think he should have been, but nevertheless, that's why I've graded Hull a D. Ipswich Town, they're going to have to go in the F category. I'm joking. They're in the A category. In fact, Ipswich probably register to being in a category above A. If you could create an A++++++++ category, it'd still probably register for that as well. The achievement of Ipswich this season is an unprecedented one. You know, to not only achieve back-to-back promotions, which hasn't happened in over a decade, but to do it when you're amongst some of the most wealthy and powerful parachute payment teams we've ever seen. You know, Leicester, Leeds and Southampton set a standard we've not seen at the top of the Championship before, and for Ipswich to keep up with them was mesmerising. You know, for any team, any standard Championship team who'd not just been relegated, to keep up with them would have been an A. But for Ipswich to do it straight from League One, a lot of the players they played in League One stayed with them throughout this campaign and ended up playing through the whole thing too. It is one of the most incredible, if not the most incredible promotion I think we've ever seen in Championship history, and I wish them all the best in the Premier League. I think A is even a slight undervaluing how good Ipswich were, just putting them in A. They should be in a category of their own, really, but yeah, an unbelievable story, an unbelievable promotion, and a story and an achievement we might not see for a very, very long time. Now, Leeds United, they of course failed in the playoff final. They lost to Southampton. I think maybe they've joined the record for the side with the most points to not get promoted, and they've also failed to get promoted with the most expensive squad ever assembled at Championship level. So it would have been, again, this is the thing with the playoffs, it's all or nothing, it's win or bust, and had they gone up, this would be completely different. But the fact Leeds find themselves back in the Championship this season, coming up, they're going to have to sell all their best players. They had the most expensive squad. They've failed. It's a failure for me. And there was times this season where, especially going into the new year, they looked like the best team in the league full stop. They were the ones who we all thought would be top, would be winning the title. for them for one, bottle automatic promotion in the manner they did, losing 4-0 to QPR, for example, then also not turning up in the playoff final like they did, it is a failure. It's a failure for Leeds. Not quite an F, because I think a newly relegated side maybe getting back-to-back relegations would register as an F, but with the quality of Leeds' squad and how they had promotion and maybe even the title in their grasp, to lose it all and be the only relegated side staying down with all that was at stake, the players they'll lose, they're going in an E. Now, yeah, it might seem harsh, 90 points. It might seem harsh with some of the football we saw, some of the goals they scored. I get it. But I think when it comes down to it, with the quality Leeds had and the position they put themselves in, they should have gotten themselves out of this division. They should have gotten through the playoffs. They were a better side than Southampton across the season. And to find themselves losing in the biggest game in the manner they did, they didn't turn up. So Leeds, unfortunately, fell apart again, and that's why they're an E. Now Leicester, they won the title, but they didn't do it that well. That's why they're going in a B. And they very, very nearly bottled the whole thing. That's why they're not quite getting an A. Of course, the standard they'd set at times this season, the football they played at times this season, yep, they looked like they were going to run away with it. And it would have been undoubtedly an A. And maybe at one point they looked on course to break the record that Reading set in terms of points. And they might have been looking like they were on course to being the greatest championship side in history. But the downfall and the collapse in the second half of the season, to which they nearly bottled it, was unprecedented. Now, yep, they got over the line, fair play to them, but I don't think they ever looked all that convincing, and they almost blew it. So they don't deserve to be on par with Ipswich, in my opinion, for that, but they still achieved the goal. The bare minimum for them, just like it was Leeds, with the expensive squad they had, the quality at their disposal, they had to get promoted, and they did. So for me, without being great, it was job done for Leicester, and that's why they're a B. Boro, my club, I'm putting Boro in C, exactly like Coventry. Again, Boro undoubtedly would have been in the playoffs had we not give the rest of the championship an 8-game head start. We were bottom, of course, after that Sheffield Wednesday game, that horrible game at the start of the season. And again, like Coventry, commendable how we've managed to battle our way back up into the playoff picture. Like Coventry, we had an overhaul of players. We lost our best players last season as well, albeit they were more loans than what Coventry's were in permanents. But like them, we had a huge overhaul in squad. A lot of players to get used to the system. It took them a lot of time. We built over the season and we almost got into the playoffs at the end, like Coventry. The difference, I guess, is that we finished the season unbelievably strong, losing only 1 in 12. Had we kept that form going and the season had been a bit longer, Boro would have got in the playoffs, but we didn't. So that's where I think, again, not a disastrous season for us. Yep, it could have been better, but given all the circumstances surrounding the team, the squad, the turnover, the change, the transition, you accept it and you hope we can kick on again and go one step further next season. That's why I'm giving us a C. Millwall, I'm going to put in C as well. Now, there was a point to which they wouldn't have been. Millwall were looking over their shoulders for large points of this season, and Neil Harris really come in and saved them in the end when you think about it, because I don't recall the guy who was in charge prior, who his name escapes me now, but the young manager they got in, it didn't work, and they were very much looking like they were going to go from playoff hopefuls to maybe in a relegation scrap. But I think the way Neil Harris come in provided some stability to Millwall, got them playing the Millwall way, I guess, got their identity back, and guided them to mid-table, to which they were in such a safe position. The thought of relegation was not even in the back of their heads. I think it's a commendable way to finish the league. So although they were in trouble for large parts, Millwall finished well. Harris did a good job. That's why they'll get a C. Norwich, I'm going to give a B. I thought they did a really good job, actually, because there were times this season where David Wagner looked like he was in bother, and I'm sure there was a period before Christmas where they were in the bottom half of the league. So I think for Wagner to take all of the question marks head on, a lot of doubters, a lot of criticisms coming his way at times this season, for him to stick in there, guide the team to the playoffs, is a very good achievement. Now, of course, it was always going to be tough for them and West Brom to compete with Southampton and Leeds in the playoffs, but I think getting them there in the manner he did is a very, very commendable job. Now, although, yep, he's not there anymore, maybe the sacking with him was harsh, maybe it was always going to come, unless they got promoted, I don't know. It depends now whether the new manager can take that on and maintain Norwich's playoff credentials, but I think for Wagner to get them in there, it was very, very good from him. Shame he's lost his job, but I think he did a good enough one this season to get a B. Now, Plymouth's a tough one because they started the season so well and they looked like they weren't even going to be thinking of relegation, which for a team like Plymouth who'd just come up was an amazing achievement. But then they shot themselves in the foot. Can't help losing Schumacher, of course, but the appointment of Ian Foster was a disaster. However, they managed to stay up, which ultimately was their goal. And I think if you'd have asked all Plymouth fans at the start of the season, you'd stay up by the skin of your teeth on the final day, would you take it? They'd go, yeah, job done. That's job done. Yes, they almost completely blew it for themselves at one point, and they made life a hell of a lot harder for themselves, but they achieved their goal. And at times this season, Plymouth looked more than comfortable at this level and played some very good stuff. So I'm going to give them a B. I know they nearly got relegated, which maybe it would be a disaster, maybe not, because they've just come up. But I think for them to survive in the league's a great achievement. And I think we can't forget how good they were in the first half of the season. So that's why I think we can't underestimate this achievement from Plymouth. That's why they get a B. Preston's a tough one because I feel like a lot of Preston fans who really don't like Ryan Lowe would probably rate this lower. But they had a respectable finish in the end. Like, for Preston to finish 10th, I don't think that bad. Now, I know they don't like the style of play from Ryan Lowe, and maybe there's not a great connection between the two there, but Preston finishing 10th's a good season. Like, I would never have thought they'd crash their way into the playoffs, but I never really thought they'd be in any trouble. I thought mid-table was whereabouts Preston were, and they've kind of finished above that in the top 10, so I know they won't probably like Ryan Lowe and maybe want him out, but for me as a neutral, I never thought Preston looked all that good on the eye, but they always did the basics right. They always got the job done. Yeah, they maybe overperformed a bit. Maybe the stats didn't truly tell the whole story with Preston, but I think to finish where they were is more than a solid and respectable finish. So regardless of what they think of Ryan Lowe as a championship neutral, I look at Preston and think that that's definitely a C. Next up, we've got QPR, and I'm gonna put them in C. The reason why is because I feel like with the squad QPR have, they should not be in a relegation scrap. For me, I think they've got quality above and beyond the other sides down there, and they should never have been in the relegation battle they were. But the problem was they had Gareth Ainsworth. But the job Marty Cifuentes did was extremely good, and I think he got QPR back to where they should be. It obviously looks great because he took them from a position where they looked doomed and he guided them to a comfortable finish in the end. But I think he's just dragged QPR back to where they should be. So they've finished where I think they should be, and that's why they get a C. Although if you were to, I guess, split the two managers in two, Ainsworth would get an F, Cifuentes would probably get an A or a B. But I think when you balance the season out, he's got them back to where they should be. That's why they're in a C. Although I can completely see why with the job he did, people would maybe give them a B. Rotherham have to go in the F category. I said this earlier. Birmingham, I think, have had the worst season imaginable due to their expectations in their squad, etc., as I mentioned earlier. But I think even though the expectations at Rotherham would have been low, and yeah, let's not forget, they are a yo-yo club. They've not got much finance. It's always going to be a struggle for them to survive in this league. They still found a way to pretty much register one of the worst championship campaigns we've ever seen from a club. And they weren't far off being statistically one of the worst until they had a respectable end to the season. But they were relegated so far in front of everyone else. They were gone long ago, and they were a really, really poor side until they played Boro, of course, to which we just can't beat them. But anyway, regardless of when they turn into prime Barcelona when they play Boro, every other team they played, they didn't particularly play well against, and Rotherham did end up being, in the end, one of the worst championship sides we've ever seen. So that's why, although maybe they were expected to be in this sort of dogfight, they were even worse than I imagined, and that's why they've got an F. Sheffield Wednesday. Now, this is an A, and the reason is, like with Plymouth, the goal would have just been to stay up this season, and the start they had was, I think, statistically the worst start in championship history. It was down there, it was bad, and I don't think many people would have backed Danny Röhl coming into the country, brand new to the championship, and do the job he did. And for him to keep Sheffield Wednesday up is, alongside McKenna, as I think one of the best jobs we've ever seen done at the championship. Obviously, it's a different sort of job. It's keeping a side up as opposed to getting one to the Premier League. but I think he is up there in terms of the top 3 managers of the season for how he managed to get Sheffield Wednesday going in the right direction and how he got them from being miles behind everyone else to keeping them in the Championship. I just think it's one of the greatest survival stories we've ever seen, and I think it's amazing for them. I'm so glad for Wednesday, and that's why that is in the A with Ipswich. Southampton, I'm going to give a B. I think, again, they had resources, their expectations, they should get promoted in the league they're in, and although they had to do it via the playoffs, and arguably they were the 3rd best team of the 3 who come down, massive credit to Russell Martin for getting them through the playoffs, because there were times this season, I think to September time, where they looked absolutely dreadful, and it looked like the wheels were going to come off, he'd lose his job, and they'd just be dropped into just uncertainty. But he stuck in there, and he guided them to their ultimate goal, which was promotion. Now, it wasn't pretty at times, and yet they had great runs. They set a record unbeaten run for their club this season, which can't be forgotten about, but equally they also had some runs where they were really, really poor and almost bottled the whole thing. So they got where they should have, which was top 4, with Ipswich, of course, alongside Leeds and Leicester, but I think to get through the playoffs was commendable, and to win a playoff final isn't easy. So they got their goal, they achieved it, they weren't perfect, but it's still a great job, and that's why I've put Southampton in B. Stoke City, now let's not forget, this is a team who spent so much money, as they do every season. They should not be where they are. And although they had a decent end to the season, Stoke went round the usual Stoke cycle. And it might be maybe normal. Maybe they're accustomed to this and this is just Stoke doing a C. But I think it's an E for me. I don't think Stoke should be anywhere near where they are still. And I don't know how they keep finding themselves in this position season in, season out. Spending money, so many new players, recruitment is scattergun, and every single season they find themselves flirting with a relegation battle and finishing 16th to 18th. And as much as it's normal, it's not good enough for Stoke. It's not good enough for the club, it's not good enough for the players they're bringing in. And although it seems scattergun, they really do need some sort of direction at that club, I feel, to get out of this cycle. But in isolation, this is still not a good season for Stoke, although it's been the similar sort of season to what we've had in past seasons, but it's still not great, and that's why I don't think it should be excused that this is not where Stoke should be, and that's why they've got an E. Sunderland, they're in E as well. I think the drop-off from Sunderland has been quite shocking, to be honest, and in the end, had the season gone on for a few more weeks, they'd have been in a relegation scrap. I think from the position they were in with Tony Mowbray, I know things weren't perfect, but I thought everyone else thought Sunderland would kick on and contend for the playoffs once again. And for them to end up mid-table mediocrity, even lower mid-table, with such a poor end to the season, no manager yet, it's all just gone a little bit wrong at Sunderland. And I think in the end, given the expectations and the momentum the club had, they've stalled and gone backwards. It's not been a great season for the neighbours. I'm not going to lie and say I haven't enjoyed it ever so slightly, but I think with a championship neutral hat on, given the progression and the trajectory Sunderland were on, this was not a good season for them, and they desperately need to get going back in the right direction again with a new coach who they still haven't hired, so that's why they're in the E as well. Swansea getting a C, nothing else to say. This was the sort of season I expected for Swansea. They were up, they were down, they were mid-table, they didn't flirt with relegation, they didn't really flirt with playoffs. Yeah, they didn't start well under Michael Duff, but I think they've ended up finishing quite strongly in the end. They've done alright towards the end of the season. Let's just see how they kick on. Not much else to say about Swansea. It was just a very average season. Watford are a C as well. I think maybe you could argue they were a little bit disappointing compared to where they should be. They've been very up and down again, Watford, this season, but I think Tom Cleverley's come in, provided a bit of stability, so we'll see what comes from Watford now, but maybe it should be a D. Maybe I should put them in a D because they've not maybe been as good as expected with some of the quality of players they've got, so I will put Watford in a D. Because yeah, a 15th place finish for Watford, yeah, given the fact they were only relegated a few seasons back, actually isn't great, is it? So yeah, I think that the turbulence, the up and down nature of this season for Watford, yeah, they've steadied the ship somewhat, but I think overall it has been a disappointment, so I will drop them down into D. And finally, West Brom are going to get an A. I'm going to give them an A because, for me, all the off-field issues must have been so distracting. They've not been able to sign players, they've not had much money. It'll have been extremely difficult for Carlos Corberán, I'd imagine, to keep things positive and keep this ship going in the right direction. I think for them to achieve playoffs is really quite an underrated achievement given everything else that was going on. I think the consistency, they went maybe a little bit under the radar because of how they were just in 5th or 4th for long periods. I think they were 5th for an absolute age. So maybe it's gone under the radar with West Brom because they've just been so steady without drama. But I think doing that on the pitch is so commendable. When off the pitch, there's so much uncertainty. So I think a lot of people might not give Corberán the credit that he's done, or the credit he deserves this season for the job he's done. But I honestly think it was quite outstanding getting them to the playoffs. And hopefully, if things calm down for West Brom and they can get things sorted off the pitch, keep Corberán, the future should be pretty bright for them. So there you go, guys. There's my championship grading for this season. That's where I've placed all of the clubs. Do let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you're a fan of any of these particular championship clubs, let me know what you grade your club and why. Or if you're a championship neutral, let me know where you grade each side in the comments section below. But until next time, guys, if you've enjoyed this video, as always, smash the like button, subscribe for more, and leave me a comment below with your thoughts. And until next time, do take care, guys, and I'll see you all in the next one.